And this, I have to say, this is really among my favorite half hours of the week, because the idea of studying texts that bring hope, I think, is so necessary during dark times. We bring a sense of hope and a sense of light into each other's lives by studying, and we get to learn all these different perspectives from different rabbis. So this week, I'm really excited to have as our teacher my dear friend, Rabbi Faith Cantor. Rabbi Cantor and I have known each other for 17 years, Faith. I hate to say the number out loud.
Oh
Um,
God, I'm feeling old.
I know. She and I were assistant slash associate rabbis together in Charlotte. When I was ordained, she was a couple of years ahead of me. She was at the conservative synagogue and I was at the Reform synagogue. Today, Rabbi Cantor is doing several kinds of work in the Baltimore, Maryland area. She's the director of the Hebrew school at Beit Chaverim congregation in Columbia, Maryland. She also does work around hospice, and she's a wonderful teacher. And so I'll invite you to join me in the blessing for study, and then I'll turn things right over to her. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu v'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed is the one whose mitzvot bring holiness to our lives and who commands us to engage in, to immerse in words of Torah. If you have thoughts or things you want to say during the discussion, as always, you can either put them in the chat or raise your hand electronically, and I'll keep track of hands that are raised and bring them to Rabbi Cantor's attention. And with that, I'll just turn things right over to Rabbi Faith Cantor.
Good morning, folks. How are you? I just saw in the chat, one, that someone has a kid in Baltimore today. Super cool. It's very fun. And then I saw there's another group representing Ojai, California. I grew up at Ramah, California, and it's not often that I get to see folks from Ojai. So that's also really fun. Thank you, Micah, for inviting me to teach this morning. Or afternoon, I guess we've technically started. And it's always great to be able to teach some Torah. Our topic is hope, and I think hope is probably a subject that can always, be a good topic for conversation, but probably many of us are feeling a pull into discussing hope or feeling hopeful or trying to understand hope differently right now, and certainly over the last 5.5 months or so. And I was telling Micah when I logged in that I'd been doing kind of a deep dive of texts for this and enjoying it, but more than anything, I think was also kind of looking at it right now, right? This wasn't just a topic that Micah said, oh, do you want to teach on this? But is how do we teach, Torah that's timely? So we are going to look at 2 biblical selections as a preview. And then we are going to be discussing an essay by Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who was the chief rabbi of England, of Great Britain for many, many years, and who his teachings are a little bit more new to me, but with every exposure to them, I just walk away smiling and feeling good. So I hope we can all do some of that today. So I'm going to start by showing you 2 quotes and a picture that I hope will kind of frame where we are going, right? What was will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun, from Kohelet, from Ecclesiastes. And then, let him sit alone and be patient. When he has laid it upon him, let him put his mouth to the dust. There may yet be hope. And that's from Eicha, from the Book of Lamentations, which we attribute to the prophet Jeremiah. And the picture on the screen was put up by Bring Them Home Now, Bring Hirsch Home Now, the Hostages Forum. It says, we will dance again. And these, for me, kind of sum up where we are in our world right now. And I'm curious if anyone wants to share that, either from a pre-October 7th perspective or now a post-October 7th perspective, does Jewish tradition and your Jewish text study and your Jewish learning, does hope seem to be a theme that is infused? Is it something that you have spent an amount of time studying? Is it something you've come to classes on before, been in a shiur before? Or is it something that maybe sounds good today that you haven't really seen as a theme before? Lisa.
So I don't know that it's specifically that I've specifically studied it in the text. I think that we try to glean hope from it, but I don't know that it specifically is saying about being hopeful. So in the work I've done pre-October 7th, and definitely in the studying done post-October 7th, there's been a sincere effort to try to highlight, if you will, where to find the hope, if you will, in the text studies.
For sure. For sure.
I think that some of the best messages of hope come from the Holocaust survivors. People like Anne Frank, well, she wasn't a survivor. And I think it's Rabbi Shapiro, whose writings were very spiritual. And he was the chief rabbi of Warsaw. And he still, in spite of all the things that occurred, had a message of hope. And Heschel and all these people that were involved in the Holocaust and still saw good and hope.
And then my comment, although my dog's now barking in the other room, is that the passage you just put up, there's nothing new under the sun, from Ecclesiastes, it never occurred to me to think of it as hopeful. That I always think of it actually as pessimistic. There's nothing new. Oh, there's nothing new to be learned. Think that we have the same problems people always had. But the idea that we will come back to joy actually is a whole other way of reading that passage. And so yes, I think there is hope there, even though it never occurred to me to find it there.
Right. It's kind of like a pessimistic language, perhaps. And it wouldn't necessarily lead you to the hope side first, where you begin to think of like all these things that are burden or troubling and difficult. But and there's my confession, that's where Rabbi Sacks jumped in, and he used this as a quote, and it really started to resonate me kind of in the same way. Is even if we're constantly returning to things that are challenging, which feels like we're in that place right now in the Jewish world, that we're just in such a difficult time. But even though our history is kind of littered with these difficult times, it's also littered with all of this hopeful stuff and the idea that we emerge from these difficult times. And one idea that I kind of want to share is that in Jewish tradition, through everything I've read, in Jewish tradition, it's pretty clear that we create our own hope. We don't just expect it to happen. And yes, we might say our faith in God, just leaves us with this ultimate hope. But if you look at Jewish experience, there are plenty of reasons to think, there isn't hope. Yet it's our actions and the things we do that we make this choice to bring hope into Jewish life, into Jewish living, and hopefully like throughout the world, right? We're bringing it with us. So I want to look. There's the link here to the whole essay, and the essay is actually a Devar Torah on Parshat Bechukotai from Leviticus. And what I've kind of done with it is I've broken apart paragraphs and reordered them for the sake of our conversation. So when you look up the essay, you're going to see everything that I'm giving you, but you might see it in a slightly different order. But Judaism is the principled rejection of tragedy in the name of hope. Right, as we were saying, that we have a history that we can touch upon tragedies, but we also have histories of Jewish accomplishment and Jewish survival. And perhaps one of the ways that we have faced these tragedies over and over again is by saying we choose hope. We choose to see past them. We choose to keep going. I just want to point out, because you'll see it several times, where my spell check picks up things that might be a spelling error. Some of it, as you go on, is actually British English. Just wanted to give you that, which I guess is probably Canadian English also. So I'm in a good crowd. So if we look at the blue paragraph, the very existence of the universe, of human life and consciousness, is seen as the result of a series of meaningless acts intended by no one, with no redeeming purpose. All we know for certain is that we are born, we live, we will die, and it will be as if we have never been. Hope is not known in cultures who look like this, right? The Greeks are famous for the Greek tragedies. That's what they get. We have our tragic moments. So if we go, Aristotle defined hope as a waking dream, a private wish that things might be otherwise, as seen through the eyes. Okay, we got through that paragraph. Greeks. Let's go to modern times with Peter Berger, the sociologist, calls hope a signal of transcendence, a point in which something beyond penetrates into the human situation. There is nothing inevitable or even rational about hope. It cannot be inferred from any facts about the past or the present. Those with a tragic sense of life hold that hope is an illusion, a childish fantasy, and that a mature response to our place in the universe is to accept its fundamental meaninglessness and cultivate the stoic virtue of acceptance. Right? Is that the world we want to live in that Peter Berger just described? There's nothing rational about it. We don't learn anything from the past. We don't learn anything from what's going on now. That's really not the Jewish way of seeing things. Judaism insists otherwise, that the reality that underlies our universe is not deaf to our prayers, blind to our aspirations, indifferent to our existence. We are not wrong to strive to perfect the world, refusing to accept the inevitably of suffering and injustice. So I think that's the moment where Rabbi Sacks really kind of jumps off the page for me right now. Yes, Susan.
Well, it's always seemed to me that without hope, however one defines hope, whether it's psychological, whether it's based on events that are actually happening, internal or external, endogenous or whatever. I'm sorry, I'm under the weather. That without hope, you die. And I don't mean die. I mean, although it can mean that, I mean metaphorically die, metaphysically die, psychologically die. Without hope, that you have no soul.
I hear that. Yes. Yes, keep going. Jump in. Aiko, is that a hand?
Hello,
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I'm not used to doing this on my phone. The whole thing about what you were saying about we have to create hope reminds me of my current situation. After October 7th, I lost a bunch of friends who didn't want to be associated with me, but I found a whole Jewish community. I found a whole group of friends, people who understood me. And I think that in itself was a start of creating hope. It was basically creating a will to want to go on, a will to want to, I guess, keep surviving. So.
And I think that maybe, I think you're touching on something that maybe when things are going well and the world seems, you know, just, if not running smoothly, but running in neutral, then a conversation about hope we don't have that same imperative, right? We don't have that same imperative because it feels like things are okay. But it's really in these moments where hope is challenged, right? Someone else said that the people who have spoken about hope from the perspective of being survivors of the Shoah or people who have taught about the Shoah, right? It's in these moments that seem absolutely the most dark that perhaps we're driven to want to talk about hope more. And that's perhaps where we then get charged with the idea of we can wait, we can say, all right, something different might happen, or we can say, okay, it's not rational to think something's going to happen, or we can say we're going to make something happen. And that's, I'm going to come back to that at the very end, the idea of making something happen. But we're going to look a little bit more at some different parts of this essay. Human existence is always oriented towards the future. Man exists by constantly extending his being into the future, both in his consciousness and in his activity. An essential dimension of this futurity of man is hope. It is through hope that men overcome the difficulties of any given here and now, and it is through hope that men find meaning in the face of extreme suffering. Only hope empowers us to take risks, engage in long-term projects, marry and have children, and refuse to capitulate in the face of despair. And if you go back and you think about, Jewish narrative, right, is that even from the very beginning of being slaves in Egypt, what did we always do? Is we didn't get stuck in that moment and we looked for the future. We took this action of saying that we weren't going to remain stuck, but that we were going to start imagining something different. Yeah, Micah.
Yeah, this is reminding me of something I've read, and I know I've read in sociology, which is that part of what sets human beings apart is imagination, the ability to see something that doesn't yet exist or something that's different from what exists. And it seems to me that hope is a central element of that we can see the possibility of what's different and better than what is right now. And that's the only way that you can work toward it, right? It's what I think sits at the base of the idea of messianism or tikkun olam or meaning or legacy, all of that. It's about our ability to see what is not yet.
Right. Nice. I see a couple of more hands.
Okay, I think I'm next. So it's interesting as you read this because I realized I was in Israel in January. I went on a, solidarity mission. And one of the things that really struck me, and I do different humanitarian work, and it seems to strike me each time I go into these, horrific situations, is that the people that are in it, I'm not talking about those of us that come to support and aid, but the people that are actually in it, there is a sense of resiliency in them, even through the trauma, even through the sadness, even through whatever it is. And as you read this, and I'm listening to the commentary that you're sharing, everyone's sharing, I'm thinking about that the Israelis, the Arab Israelis, the Jewish Israelis, Palestinians, anyone that I spoke to, it was this looking to the future. Even though everybody's mired in the now, they also were very much about the future, and there was hope. It wasn't about there is no future. All right. It was all about them. So yeah, that was very, it's in there. It's in there to be found.
Yes. Karen?
Yeah, I'm thinking, back to your first question about, where in our text do we find hope? And I'm thinking that the very first commandment that we receive is pru'uvu, to go forth and multiply. And I cannot think of any single act that is more hopeful than having a child. And I know now it's become a bit of a thing online to read about people who are choosing not to have children for various reasons, and I certainly respect that. But one of the biggest reasons people are saying that they don't want to have children is the state of our planet, climate change, and so on. And yet there are other people who are saying, no, this is precisely the time to have a child, because one of those children that is born may be the one to move us forward in better ways, or more than one of those children. So it's such an incredibly hopeful act to have a child, and so completely forward looking.
Absolutely. Hi, Ellie.
Hi, so my comment is much more pessimistic, and it's making me sad. But I've been thinking about this a lot. I recently had a conversation with an Israeli friend who now lives in Atlanta, and we were talking about his childhood versus the childhood that his nieces and nephews who live in Israel are currently experiencing. And he said one of the most noteworthy things for him is that even though he grew up experiencing war and conflict, there was always a vision of hope. There was a vision of peace. One of the things he said was there were songs written about peace that people sang that were part of their daily musical repertoire. And that doesn't exist now. And these kids are growing up, an entire generation, without a plan for peace. And he was speaking specifically about Israelis, so moving to the other side of the border is a totally different conversation, I would suppose, but maybe it's not, I don't know. But it's so hard to hear that I want to be hopeful. I want to be working toward and be hoping for peace, but I don't know if it felt different. It felt different. This generation feels different.
Yeah. So Anne, jump in, and then I want to follow up on what Ellie was just saying, because it's actually been one of my driving thoughts over the last few months.
I was thinking that maybe hope is in our DNA, because Abraham stepped forward with hope, and Esau and Jacob met each other with hope, and Isaac had hope, and Moses had hope. It's part of our heritage, and I think it carries through even through today. We have hope of peace. We have hope of the future. I think Jewish people have that just built into their DNA.
Yes. And I mean, I'm so conscious that 30 minutes is not a long time to talk about anything now. But Ellie, I just wanted to touch on what you were saying, because it's hard for me to study anything Jew. It's hard for me to walk around today and not be thinking about what's going on in Israel and what's happening in Israel, how it affects us. But certainly this question of hope, one of the things that's been interesting for me is kind of navigating this, that I have young kids, and my 16-year-old has asked me numerous times over the last 5 months, Ima, do you think the hostages are alive? Do you think the hostages are coming home? And I'm constantly finding myself reminding my 16-year-old that I'm not a military expert, and I'm not in military intelligence, and I don't have a good way of making that guess, right? Like, I don't have anything more than what I hope, but also kind of like sitting with this reality that 160 days later, it seems less practical, perhaps, and reasonable. But in this idea that this is part of our DNA, and someone spoke to the resiliency of Israelis, is I have been following probably since, October 11th or 12th, Rachel Poland Goldberg, who's Hirsch's mother in Israel. And that family jumps out a little bit more. My husband's first cousin is good friends with the family and knows them well. And I've been very caught up in their particular story, but what has become so clear to me is that this woman, this family, they haven't waited for a lull to address hope and to address what the future is going to look like. And they haven't taken this time to express frustration, right? They have done nothing but in the moment talk about their hope. And that, to me, it has to be something that's coded in DNA, right? It has to be something that comes from somewhere very deep in Jewish identity, perhaps deep in people who choose to live in the Middle East, which is such a difficult place for so many different reasons. It's so many different times. But I think, and Ellie, I hope this makes you feel a little bit better, because one of the posts that I was watching in this past week that I brought to my 16-year-old was Hirsch's parents going out to a neighborhood in Jerusalem where he and his high school friends had created a mural of coexistence with Israeli Arabs and with Palestinians. And these parents could not have been filled with more joy and optimism to talk about the sections of the mural that their son had painted with his friends, and explain why he chose to paint what he chose and how he reflected on this experience. So for me, if there are any people today, right now in the world, right now in Israel, who have reasons not to hope, it's this family, it's the families they're surrounded with. And if there are any people today who have the right to expect from all of us to continue to hope, it's these same families. So I don't know what tomorrow's going to look like, right? Like I don't know what tomorrow's going to look like. I can't answer for my child whether the hostages are coming home and whether they're going to come home alive and what their health is going to be like. But I know that as long as these families are asking us to hope, that we have an obligation to do so, even if we don't know what it's going to look like. In that we come from a deep tradition that experiences pain and suffering, and yet we continue to look for tomorrow, and we continue to be told that we act, that it's our actions that are going to bring about tomorrow. And that, it's funny. So when I think of like what were my sources and kind of preparing for this very brief half hour, I feel like my sources really were the Tanakh, Rabbi Sacks, and the Poland Goldberg family, right, is my primary sources of what does Jewish tradition teach us about hope, and certainly what does what do the leaders of our Jewish community right now tell us about hope today, and what we need to do with that. So again, here's the source for the essay. I totally recommend reading it. It was really, really very good. And I'm really enjoying so much, reading more about Rabbi Sacks. And I hope I get a chance, to learn with you guys again. I hope we still get to keep talking about hope and feeling hope and experiencing hope, and that we're kind of charged to make our own future, not just to watch it happen, but, to be a part of making it happen.
Thank you.
Micah, thank you.
I want to say thanks to Rabbi Faith Cantor, my old friend, for teaching. This was really moving. I'm so appreciative that you joined us today and that you brought this incredible essay, which is now in the chat. I will also post this on YouTube along with the link to the essay for anybody who wants to go back and watch it and maybe access the essay from there. Next week, we are studying with Rabbi Jeff Middleman, who's the founder of Sinai and Synapses, which looks at the intersection of religion and science in Judaism. Same bat time, same bat channel. I look forward to seeing all of you there. And again, thanks to Rabbi Faith Cantor for this very hopeful conversation. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.